Hardcore is probably the game mode that I've played the most compared to the other game modes in game. And I'm gonna be honest, the potential that game mode had, or rather still has, is huge. However, with how Hardcore has been treated by the devs since the release, left the game mode in a very bad spot for both the devs and for the players. And today I wanted to talk how the game mode, the Hardcore game mode, the potential of that game mode has been basically ruined after years of not doing anything interesting with it, and how it could have been improved. Now, from the start, let's compare the Hardcore on release to Hardcore game mode we have today. Those are the following changes that have been done in span of over 2 years. Change the inflation amount. It went from like 50% to 40% to 50 again. It changed a lot throughout the months. Fix the bug involving the placement cost of a tower not being affected by inflation, meaning that Scout that was supposed to cost 300 was actually just costed 200 to place, and that was fixed in the first update, the first invasion update. Another one, added some maps, removed some maps, deleted one Void River, and changed the Void River health from 600,000 that was at the beginning to 1.2 million HP. Increased the gem triumph amount from 150 to 300, and other bug fixes like Toxic Gunner no longer making Void River stack or anything. And that's all the changes that Hardcore game mode got for 2 years, I'm pretty sure, which, I'm not gonna lie, is kinda disappointing. Although if you compare the changes that Hardcore got to the changes that other game modes got, Hardcore is the only one that actually had any updates, since normal, Molten and Fallen game modes didn't have any updates or changes after Hardcore released. Although it's most likely because those game modes are kinda, I'd say, finished. They've been like worked on for... I mean, when the game released, those game modes were basically being worked on throughout how the game developed, so they had a lot of changes. But now, I'd say the game modes are kinda finished. I don't think they need that many balance changes. Other than normal mode, of course, because normal mode is still harder than Molten mode, and it should be easier than Molten mode. It should be made easier. Since the Hardcore is the only game mode that actually had any updates, does that mean that devs actually care about Hardcore? I'd say no, because most of the changes that we ever got to Hardcore was to make Hardcore even harder, and not in a good way, because it's been done very badly. Other than Void River change, there was not a single change that would make Hardcore a little bit more interesting to play, and I think that's a shame. The first time Hardcore got released, it was in the beta testing, and it was fun. I'd say that Hardcore beta was probably the most fun time to play Hardcore. It wasn't too difficult, nor was it too easy. I managed to do my first Hardcore triumph after testing out several towers with completely random people. Like, we got some towers, we died, and we got some different towers, and this time it worked. Like, you experimented a lot with beta Hardcore. There was no strategies, so you had to figure out everything on your own. And it was fun, because it wasn't too difficult and it wasn't too easy. When beta testing ended and Hardcore released with the update, it was received very poorly. The overhaul update basically flopped. And I think that's because most of the towers got reworked in a bad way. Most of the game modes and enemies were reworked, also some in a bad way. And most of the things that were working before seemingly broke in the new update. And also Golden game mode was removed together with Platinum crates for some reason. And of course Hardcore was made harder for some reason. I'm still confident that Hardcore game mode is being mostly ignored by the devs, because it was a huge part of the overhaul update, which was basically considered by the community one of the worst updates. And even touching the game mode in any shape or form makes the devs just not have a good time with it. While hardcore was a part of the reason, mostly due to like VIP servers not working for hardcore lobbies, and like the gem grinding that took ages was horrible, I don't think that was like the main criticism of the overhaul update. I think it was mostly the tower changes, but I could be wrong. Before the hardcore even released, it was very hyped up. New, seemingly difficult game mode for like elite players was to release in the near future, so people were pretty hyped about it. And to this day, hardcore was the only game mode in TDS that ever got a live event in game. Although that live event broke just from the sheer amount of players, it still makes you think that hardcore was something bigger, like the hardcore was planned to be something bigger than it is today. When game mode released, it didn't live up to people's expectations. And I think that's because of the several reasons which are still present to this day, mostly, and I'm gonna mention them right now. First reason, of course, being the gameplay of the hardcore, and how hardcore is very limiting on the towers you can bring, and it is just boring to play. Because of enemies such as like invisibles on like wave 10, balloons on wave 12, and then like LEDs on wave 14. Also to like the goddamn inflation, which is like 50% more cost, the early game is... the towers you can bring in the early game are very limited. Most of the towers in game are basically useless in hardcore. Like half the towers are useless in hardcore just because of the early game. If an early game tower can't hit more than 2 special enemies at once, it's basically useless to play. So you can just play something much better than it. Overall gameplay of hardcore are also just not very interesting. It is just done in a very bad way. For example, inflation. For some reason, developers thought that putting the inflation is a smart idea at the early game. Most of the time, when you like play like Bloons Tower Defense, basically the further you get, it's harder to make money, which makes sense. In hardcore, it's completely opposite. It's very difficult to get money early game, but it's very easy to get money in the mid game and the late. This makes early game way too hard. Gameplay issues just don't end at the early game. The issues are throughout the game mode. Like the gameplay issues are throughout the game mode. The overall pacing is horrible. Early game is way too hard, and mid game and late game is laughably easy. After you beat wave 25, you basically have 90% chance to get to wave 50 and win it. Further waves after 25 are so much easier than the early game counterparts. All you have to do is place down the tower that is most cost efficient in your loadout, and you will be fine. That's because game doesn't even experiment with any special enemies that could counter that playstyle. For example, you have LEDs on wave 14, which counter like golden scouts, everything that is very good in fallen mode. That the LEDs and balloons and invisibles, early game invisibles counter that. However, in the mid game and late game, there are basically no enemies that will counter that playstyle. You can just spam the towers that are most cost efficient and you can win. I'm confident that after like wave 36, you can basically go for a walk, for like 10-minute walk, come back to your PC, and you will be still playing, you will not lose. I'm confident of that. Because of the middle game being basically absent of any special enemies that could threaten you in any way, after lead boss, which comes out at wave 16, then we are not introduced to any other special enemy that could threaten us in any other way until lead balloons at wave like 38. And no, I'm not forgetting about the Fallen Titan, because Fallen Titan is a boss that is not special, he just has a lot of HP, so if you spam towers, you can basically counter him with just spamming towers that are cost efficient. That's basically entire middle game, absent of any special enemy. Next special enemies are like the circuits and the souls, and those enemies are like the most annoying ones and most like enemies that are just not fun to play against, believe me. And then we have the soul boss. Did anyone ever died to a soul boss? I think it's as threatening as the hazmat enemy in Fallen. I have no idea if there's a single team that actually died to the soul boss. Which makes me think, While hardcore has its own charm in the early game due to like the amount of special enemies like the LEDs, balloons and other enemies, it lacks anything that makes it special in the middle game and the late game. It just feels like Fallen. After like early game, it just feels like Fallen skin. I'm not. This is just Fallen mode with 50% more cost to me, with the only difference being the boss. I have to give credit where it's due. Devs actually made hardcore boss feel somewhat fun to play against, unless you are doing this solo. And also if the music actually worked and didn't break like most of the time for some reason. So yeah, gameplay wise, hardcore focuses most of its difficulty and like any interesting concepts way too much on the early game, which makes most players give up on hardcore altogether on the game mode. Just because of the difficulty of the early game, players just give up. And hardcore doesn't also make the game mode any interesting or special past early game. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. It's not even trying to. For example, the Awakened Fallen King. Remember that enemy that everyone was talking about back in the day? Well, after some digging, I figured out the Awakened Fallen King was supposed to be a boss for the hardcore mode. It was never done. I think the boss was just not finished because hardcore was kinda ash. Imagine if instead of the Fallen King on hardcore, there was like the Awakened Fallen King actually being in the game with more health, new abilities. How much more fun it would be than having just the normal Fallen King. Just one example. Now let's move to the design of hardcore. I'm gonna be honest, hardcore's enemy design feels lazy and confusing. The first enemy that you will be introduced to as a new player to the hardcore is the normal enemy you will find in the Fallen mode. After like playing Fallen mode for like 20 times before going to hardcore. The first special enemy that you haven't seen yet will be Hefties, which are just like heavies with 4 more health, and they don't look that interesting to me. How much better it would be if the normal enemies and like speedy enemies were replaced by like counterparts related to like Void and or like Corruption, because that's what I think developers intended. Like I think the Void Corruption were like the themes that the devs were going for, but it didn't really work in my opinion. You see, Mega Slow just feels like quick reskin of the heavy boss. Shadow boss is the same in both Fallen and hardcore. And the Fallen game mode has like those glitch enemies on wave 26. And hardcore has enemies called, instead of glitches, it has Fallen Rusher. For some reason, the game mode that has the Void as a boss has a lot of enemies that are called Fallens, despite Fallen mode being in-game. We have Fallen Rushers, Fallen Reaper, Fallen King, Fallen Swordmaster, Fallen Titan, Fallens themselves. We have so many Fallen enemies in hardcore that would fit much better in Fallen mode instead. Remember the like Voidlands, like the Fungi Island, which were like maps for hardcore? Well, I hope you remember them, because those were the only 2 maps that actually seemed fit to be a hardcore map. They like fit the hardcore game mode's aesthetic so well, but you know, the devs removed them. Voidlands because it was broken, and the Fungi Island because it was apparently too easy. And refer to the earlier point of the video of devs making changes to hardcore just to make the game mode harder. Now, because of like the design of the enemies not being very clear, it just feels to me like a Fallen, like the Fallen game mode. But what if the Fallen had 50 waves, different boss, and more cost of the towers? That's basically hardcore to me. While I said that the Void River as a boss is interesting to play against, the boss design itself doesn't look that much interesting to me. The boss feels very bland for what's supposed to be like the ending of the hardest game mode that developers intended for it to be. He just seems like a goddamn giant wall that spawns in and approaches your base very, very slowly. That he occasionally does some like attacks, but if you have medic, it basically makes those attacks useless. Now, thank God they actually combined those 2 Void Rivers. When there was 2 of them, not only were they very annoying to play against with like the stance they made, because back then I don't think Medic actually worked, I think Medic was still broken, but it's also made Void Reaver even less threatening as a final boss. What kind of a final boss has 2 copies of each other? This does not make sense. Because of the Void Reavers having 2 copies of each other on the wave 50, it makes me think that the Voidcaster, you know, the guy that was supposed to, or rather the girl that was supposed to be like the narrator after the commander, she was basically removed from the game. Which, why didn't the devs focus on her more? This one character is more interesting than the entire hardcore game mode to me. What are the chances that developers intended for the Voidcaster to be the final boss and the Void Reaver is just to be like a fake out? What if like wave 50 wasn't supposed to be the last and wave 51 was supposed to be like the last wave with the Voidcaster? Because I think that's what the developers were firstly intended the hardcore to be like. Imagine you like take down the enemy that has over 1 million health and the triumph skin doesn't come up, the wave comes up 1 more. That would be so amazing in my opinion. It would be actually so fun. But of course, the hardcore update, like when it released, it was very rushed, so there was nothing done with it. In conclusion, the design of the enemies isn't like focused on anything, it's basically a mix of everything for some reason. It feels like there are more fallen enemies in hardcore than there are fallen enemies in fallen mode. There's no clear design of what hardcore is supposed to be like themed after, like what is supposed to be focused on. Does it focus on like fallen enemies? Does it focus on like void enemies, corrupted enemies? There's no clear answer to that. The game just cannot make up its mind. Now, we will focus on the last thing, which is my general observation of the game mode that I've seen from release. You see, when the hardcore released, it also released with the gems being the new currency. And you could buy 1 tower when it released. You could actually buy 2, it was mecha base and accelerator, but after the beta testing, mecha base was removed because it was a glitch that you were not supposed to buy that. Accelerator was the only tower that you could buy for almost, I think it was 2 years. It was accelerator on release, and then in the big time frame between accelerator being released and the engineer being released, there was nothing new to like there was nothing you could buy with gems. Like no crate, no anything, no new tower. Accelerator and engineer are the only thing you can actually buy. Which makes me kinda think that developers forgot about this game, or they just don't want to work on it. Because if they made a new currency to it, I think there was a lot of things planned with the game mode, and like I think much more was planned with hardcore. Why don't they add more towers, like more gem towers? I'm pretty sure that Accelerator and Engineer make most of the income from the game. So making gems, like making only 2 things being purchasable from the gem shop is a strange thing to me. Like if you added more like maybe a crate, maybe new skins that you could buy with gems, the game would actually be kinda interesting because it would have its own theme after it. But because of the enemy design we discussed earlier, it's kinda difficult to do. Is it too late to make hardcore like anything more interesting? I don't think it's too late. I would actually love to hardcore being reworked, not just enemies, but also the design of like the enemies, like being just completely reworked on. And maybe if Voidcaster actually came back as like the final boss, like the Void Reaver, if you defeat the Void Reaver, it's not the end. That would actually be a fun plot twist in my opinion for the game mode. And maybe like the Voidcaster being on like the secret wave. Anything that would be interesting. However, there's one thing I forgot to mention throughout this video. And I think the community is also at the fault of the developers not doing anything with hardcore. And that's because of like the strategies. You see, whenever anything changes with hardcore, like new tower will, like some towers will be nerfed, some like things will get reworked on, new maps will be added. In like 2 or 1 day, there will be already a new strategy in a Google document that you can just look at the screen, follow the steps and win. that's part of the reason why devs just don't care that much about hardcore, because if they make a change, people will just make a strategy, people will follow the strategy, and boom, they can win. That doesn't matter. Hardcore is not a lost cause. I think a lot can be improved if there's a right direction, if there's like a clear design goal and a clear gameplay like design. I think hardcore can be actually a very fun game mode in the future. Hardcore is probably the game mode I still play the most. It's not as easy as other game modes, but it can be better, and it can be much better if executed right. So yeah, that's it. See ya.